Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of God, the all-compassionate. Hello, everybody, and welcome back. Um, in our previous live streams, we covered several grounds in Rumi's thought, and then I received messages asking me to prepare and schedule a live stream with a general orientation. As I've received some questions that I will be answering. And if you have any questions, please feel free to uh, write down your messages here so that we can address them. I cannot see any messages yet. Can somebody please write something so that we make sure everything is safe? All right. Hello to you too. Thank you very much. So, like I said, this live stream is going to be more general than the previous ones. The questions that I have received so far. If you have any other questions, please write them in the comments, and I will be addressing them. I've received so far 3 questions. Some questions with 3 basic and common aspect. One, why Persian poetry? Why am I focusing so much there is heavy cloud here and it keeps, I guess everybody is seeing me now. Yeah. Why Persian poetry? When there is philosophy, why poetry? When we can arrange our propositions and everything in a very neat form, um, why philosophy? Sorry, poetry. And yes, I'm aware it's lagging. It was heavy rain and the weather is very cloudy here, so internet connection is a bit shaky. Sorry for that, but really, really out of control. Um, Philosophy can help us greatly. Through philosophy, we set up arguments to find the truth ourselves and to help others experience or find it. Not experience, find it theoretically. But philosophy is mainly theoretical, and it works mostly not with your emotions, but mostly with reason, with logic. Through rational argumentation, we walk through some steps and we arrive at some conclusions. Uh, Poetry, especially Persian poetry, um, from what I have studied for a long time, can perform better than philosophy in some aspect. Poetry, especially with poets like Rumi, Sheikh Mahmoud Shabastari, and Faiz Kashani, they can engage your reason and take several more steps, something that philosophy doesn't usually do. They can engage your emotions and your imagination. They can go put you through dialogues. Rumi loves doing this. If you read Masnavi, he does that partly in Divan Shams Tabrizi, but mostly in Masnavi. He puts you through some dialogues where you, wanted or unwanted, assume some roles. And through that, he plays with your emotions. So not only he's teaching you philosophical and ethical matters, topics, but he's also um, drilling them deep into your mind and heart. And how the way he does that is through your emotions and imagination. Many of Rumi's poems are imaginative in the sense that it's imaginative poetry. He talks about some historical matters, but uh, part of what he's discussing didn't really happen. It wasn't something historic. He takes some historic events and crafts imaginative stories and tales and dialogues based on what happened in the past. And again, through this, he's touching your heart, he's touching your not just mind, but heart and imagination. Um, Poetry, so in this sense, can be a great tool. Um, Not just poetry, but also like literature in general. If you read novels from Dostoevsky, from other great writers, who can deny that they're not doing philosophy? Read brothers Karamazov, and come and fight me if you say that is not philosophy. If you're interested in digging deep into this matter, the connection between literature and philosophy, whether literature can be a medium to articulate philosophy, I recommend Martha Nussbaum's impressive work, Love's Knowledge, Essays on Philosophy and Literature. I forgive my memory if I cannot remember it word for word, but it is something like that. Um, Through that book, Martha Nussbaum is arguing that philosophy is not just rational argumentation. We have been crafting literary works for centuries and millennia, articulating philosophy, and people still are doing that. And although in the West that practice went down a little bit in Persian poetic tradition, for example, or novels tradition, that is still alive and heated as it was the case in the 13th century, where when Rumi was living, and Attar or other famous poets were alive, but it's still going on. So that answers the question, why poetry? Why Persian poetry? Because for me, from my research, my life, that is the first question. Before I move on to the second and third question, let me remind you again, if you have any questions, please write it in the comments and I will be addressing them. The second question was, why Rumi among all poets? Um, there are many poets, and I have studied even within like Persian poetic tradition, like Sheikh Mahmoud Shabastari. I do not mean temporally. I mean um, in terms of ideology, in terms of mindset. There are some radical thinkers, radical poets, beautiful as but um, you, living in this day and age, you cannot apply many of the things they are talking about. They are more ascetics in the sense of escapism. They are offering practices that you need to basically live um, better, live on the mountains. And Rumi does not do that. Rumi does not take you away from society. You can well live in your own society, but practice the things that Rumi is offering. Rumi is the poet, mystic, philosopher of living. Um, yes, there are certain aspects of his thought that may require some seemingly radical things, but we are talking about general things. We are talking about his general framework. Generally, Rumi is the poet, mystic, philosopher of life. So that's one of the reasons I like Rumi. On the country from which Rumi hailed and country from which all this poetry is flourishing, has been flourishing. We grow up with Rumi poetry, recite Rumi's poetry from memory. Um, you read the translations. I'm talking about those who read like translations from other countries. You read the translations and you understand the meaning and the elegance. That is beautiful, but put it next to the elegance of the language he's using. That is magnificent. Some argue Razi are better poets than Rumi, and I do agree. They spend more time with the polishing of the couplets. Rumi doesn't bother with that. Rumi is more meaning oriented, I would argue, than Hafez and Sa'di. Rumi is more uh, intoxicated when he's composing poetry than Hafez and Saadi. They too are intoxicated. We can see that. There's nothing to deny. But Rumi is a bit more. Rumi is more ecstatic, I would say. And so the second reason is we grow up with Rumi poetry. We don't have other choice. And the third one is Rumi's ecstatic experiences. Um, Read Masnavi. There are didactic poetry. He's teaching you some stuff. He's Rumi as a teacher. He's teaching you ethical, spiritual matters. But then put it aside and come to Divan Shams Tabrizi, and you would be amazed by the sudden shift. In Masnavi, Rumi is the teacher. I have argued this in my publications. But in Divan, yes, he's still a teacher, but again, there are exceptions. We're looking at the big picture. But he is mostly a selfless, drawn, and lost in divine love mystic. In most cases, he doesn't know what he's saying, and he explicitly says this. Sometimes there was this poem, I don't remember exactly, but the general translation is something like, if I say I will do such and such, ignore me. I don't know what I'm saying. If I say I experienced such and such last night, ignore me. I don't know where I was last night. And in some other poems, again in Divan, he is having a dialogue with himself, saying his heart, actually symbolically. He says, "Oh heart, where were you last night that you are so intoxicated?" So when he comes back to his senses, five senses, he cannot like connect back to his intoxicated self. So he's in awe. What happened to me last night when I disconnected from my body, if I may, that I'm so intoxicated right now. He himself is wondering, and this resonates greatly with what you read in Plotinus's Enneads. In Enneads, if I may remember the words, but I will be paraphrasing, Plotinus says, sometimes I come back to myself from a wondrous beauty. And the way he experiences that beauty, he says, is when I externalize myself in relation to everything and internalize myself into myself. I'm absorbed into myself. And I see things of wondrous quality. And then I come back to my body, trapped in this body, and I wonder, how did I ever return to this body and to this consciousness? And this happens to Rumi as well. The Rumi as a teacher, I love him, no doubt, but Rumi as this intoxicated, mad poet, that's the Rumi that I love. I wholeheartedly love. That's the main reason I read Rumi. Now, there seems to be a question. Most scholars say that spiritual experience have nothing to do with reality, only a psychological disorder. What is your view? Yes, there are psychological disorders. There is schizophrenia. There are other psychological disorders. But dismissing mystical experiences entirely, saying that they are psychological disorders, is nothing but a short-sighted generalization. If you want to dig into that question, within philosophy of religion, which I specialize in, there is this topic, mystical experiences, and you can read on that topic. There is a paper coming out about mystical experience types from Rumi's perspective. I think it will be available in 1 or 2 months. Like we have drafted that paper, but read Swinburne and Mystical Experience. There is this short book called God Exists. And in that short book, there is this chapter on mystical experiences. Also, there is a great entry on Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. I also recommend that you read that on mystical experience types and credibility. There is this excellent argument if my memory aids me, uh, if I remember sometime during this live stream, I will tell you what that argument is. I can't even remember it. A writer's name. Anyways, I will get back to you on that. So there are certain arguments for and against mystical experiences. Some say, well, they are psychological disorders. When some say they are hallucinations. Some say that there might be some reality involved, but it is too subjective. So what should we do? And there are arguments against these arguments. Um, there is usually this epistemic bias against mystical experiences, saying that, well, they can be mistakes in mystical experiences, and for sure they can, but aren't there mistakes regarding our five senses? So how is it that we trust our five senses knowing that they make mistakes, but not mystical experiences, as if everything should be like mistake proof so that we can make use of them? Yes, mystical experiences are subjective. Anyone who claims objectivity in the sense that, like, guiding, I'm not talking about prophets or in Shi'i cases, imams, but um, religious authorities in general, um, who do not have revelation. Anyone who rules a country based on mystical experiences, that is not the way to go. Mystical experience is subjective, but we can make inferences from those subjective experiences. Um, Limiting reality to reason alone is not the way to go. There is more, but we should be careful how we experience those, how importantly, how we interpret mystical experiences. That is a big question. Um, what are the differences between Akbarian, Ishraqi, and Sadrian schools? Excellent question. Well, let me put it this way. Ishraqi school is the like represented by Sohrabardi. He sees the entire existence as light, and he does philosophy, but he's more mystical. And then there is Ibn Arabi, Akbarian school. Like Ibn Arabi, Akbarian school is represented by Ibn Arabi. He's doing philosophy, and there were some heavy philosophical topics even in his famously mystical works like Fusus al-Hakam, but he's mostly doing mysticism, Sufism, whatever you call it. And then between these two is Mullah Sadra. Mullah Sadra takes mysticism, makes it philosophical, so that he can prove things that others cannot. I love Ibn Arabi. Ibn Arabi and Rumi are my number ones, but Mullah Sadra is more philosophical. Therefore, he can prove things that Ibn Arabi cannot. No, we do not need philosophical proof for every mystical experience and mystical topics, but still, when we want to transfer them to others, those who are not ready to receive because they're not convinced, you cannot say, okay, come look at my hand, you're going to have that mystical experience. You need to present arguments to convince others, and here Mullah Sadra comes in. But again, I love Ibn Arabi. Ibn Arabi's thought is fascinating. He has been misunderstood greatly, and we are hoping to change that. He's misunderstood in the sense that he is understood as one of those Sufis, period. That is not the case. Ibn Arabi is a great philosopher as well. Read Fusus al-Hakam. In the first chapter, he starts talking about universals. Where on earth does that come from? On what universe is that Sufism? That is pure philosophy. He talks about other topics, more divine, theological, mystical. He comes and then all of a sudden he starts talking about universals, umur kulliya. At that point, he starts saying, look, this is philosophy. The book changes all of a sudden from purely Sufism, if I may use the word purely, to philosophy, and then he combines them. So Ibn Arabi is somewhere between a philosopher and a mystic. He loves bouncing on and off between these two poles. Another question, purely from a literary perspective, how would Rumi compare with Ferdowsi? Good question. For those of you who do not know Ferdowsi, Ferdowsi is another Persian poet. He does have ethical, let me put it this way, he does have spiritual poetry, but Ferdowsi is heavily oriented towards ethical, heroic, and national poetry and imaginative poetry. Um, his masterpiece, Shahnameh, if you read, he's teaching ethical matters, philosophical matters, but mostly through heroic tone. Rumi does that very little, more than heroic poetry, more than national poetry. He is ecstatic. He's just maddened by love. I hope that answers your question. And if there are other questions for those who have joined in the last couple of minutes, please feel free to write your questions. This is a Q&A session. Other than the questions you wrote here on Rory at rest, I received 3 questions. Why poetry, which I already answered. Why Rumi, which I already answered. Why Ibn Arabi? Now let's grapple with the third question, why Ibn Arabi? And I'm going to be answering it in relation to why Rumi. Rumi teaches us how to live. And he does that greatly. Rumi teaches us how to experience divine love. Rumi teaches us how to not see religion by a set of very strict, boring rules. Don't get me wrong, the Sharia law should be practiced very accurately, but religion is not that and that alone. There is an element of love there, and Rumi is unquestionably the master of that, I would say, teaching you how to love God, the divine beloved. But then why Ibn Arabi? Rumi is concerned with how you live. He's concerned with teaching you how to live an enlightened life. Ibn Arabi's project is somehow that, but a bit different. Rumi talks to the public and mystics, and at times he's talking to philosophers in another very friendly tone. Ibn Arabi's audience is not the public, it's not the masses. Ibn Arabi is elitist. Take any of his writings, read 2 lines, and you will understand that he's not talking to the public. The topics that he's covering and the depth in which he's articulating his thought is just awe-inspiring, magnificent, very, very technical, and foundational. I'm going to give you an example. This is a big thing. It's going to come in my publications, but let me just summarize it. Before Ibn Arabi, theologians and some even mystics and philosophers said that if you want to understand God, understand the human being. And we already have a hadith, a narration, a prophetic narration articulating this. Know yourself to know God. Ibn Arabi agrees with that, but he twists that completely. We said understand human being so that you understand God through the human being. No human being is not God. There are differences, of course, but consider it a channel. But the assumption here was that you can understand human being. Ibn Arabi changed that radically. He came and said, should we understand human being to understand God? But do we? Can we understand human being? That's a big, big question. And his answer is yes and no, but more on the no side. Yes, we understand and can study and understand the external aspects of human being, our physical bodies, to some extent our spiritual lives. But the Quran says, and also other religions, very explicitly that human beings have divine spirit. So, on which universe do you understand that? So, how do you understand the divine aspect of the human being? Asks Ibn Arabi, without asking it, like without putting it by words. He just writes, moves on. He doesn't bother usually explaining things, and so leaves it to the commentators, and they have been puzzled by his sentences for centuries. So the question he's asking is this: we need to understand the human being to understand God, but can we understand the human being to understand God? The answer is yes and no. So do you see how he turned the table? To know God, you need to know human being. You can know some aspects of the human being and from there infer that there is a creator, but you cannot understand human being fully. Therefore, you cannot understand divine essence from his essential necessity aspect. I'm using these words very carefully. From essential necessity aspect, we cannot know God. We cannot know God fully, and we cannot know human being fully. God's paradoxical nature, essence, is up to a very small scale represented in the paradoxical nature of human being. That is huge. Before that, we said this here and there, like theologians said this here and there, but nobody put it as systematically and as clear as Ibn Arabi did. You human beings paradoxical. That's why he carries the divine image. Other prophets came, according to Ibn Arabi, they talked to us from certain aspects. They talked about certain aspects of God, certain attributes of God, and then the Prophet of Islam came, according to Ibn Arabi, and he gathered all the opposite. Said, okay, that is true. This is true. This is opposite to that, but it still works in the divine essence. So the coincidence of opposites, what we call in philosophy, um, the Prophet of Islam came and did that because, according to Ibn Arabi, he is the embodiment of the grand essential name Allah. Allah embodies all names. There is rage and there is kindness. They seem to be opposite, but that name Rory encompasses both, encompasses all the seeming contradictions. So that's why the Prophet of Islam, according to Ibn Arabi, was the most paradoxical prophet and the most perfect mirror on which we could contemplate God, though respecting and admitting the grandeur of other prophets, says Ibn Arabi. I hope that answered the question. Is حقيقة الحقائق being neither existent nor is exactly? حقيقة الحقائق is like you cannot. حقيقة الحقائق is a very technical thing. If you haven't watched our episode on that, you will not understand what I'm saying. But assuming that you have watched that, حقيقة الحقائق, the reality of realities, is both divine and worldly. Its divine aspect relates to God's knowledge, and its worldly aspect is very hard to put it like this, but it's both existence and non-existence. It's both existent and non-existent. Its divine aspect relates to God's knowledge. Its worldly aspect basically governs the universe. But that's too much for this live stream. Please watch the video. I will very meticulously explain that in that video. But to understand that, you first need to understand fixed entities, ayana thabita, which is another video I have created. Fellows, if you have any questions, just write it there, and I will be addressing them. It's getting cold here, but I'm addressing them. So let's get back to coupling Ibn Arabi with Rumi. Rumi teaches you how to live. Ibn Arabi teaches you fundamental, awe-inspiringly deep, mystical, philosophical, divine matters. I would say, I would suggest reading them both. Ibn Arabi shows you that depth, but doesn't bother. I'm talking generally, there are exceptions, but doesn't bother taking your hand and taking you to that destination. That is exactly what Rumi does. He doesn't care much about technicality. He uses very simple terms deliberately, because his project is not to teach you ma'rifah, knowledge in its technicality. His project is to take your hand and uh, help you reach the destination. So you see, when coupling Ibn Arabi and Rumi, things work well. Ibn Arabi paints the roadmap, Rumi walks you on that path. That answers the third question, I assume. Is there any other questions? I will be waiting a little bit, um, making some general remarks, giving you time to type your questions. If you are also interested in people, poets who combine rationality with mysticism, I would suggest Faiz Kashani, a 17th century Persian poet, philosopher, mystic, chronic commentator, and muhaddith, um, who very elegantly combines reason and philosophy. There are other Sufis, other mystics who reject reason altogether, and I always had problems with them. We to understand the spiritual matters, we don't need to reject philosophy. Philosophy is a tool. Quran says here and there, why do you not think? Think. Why are you not thinking? Always and always and always asking us. So we don't need to like put away philosophy. You can use it as a tool. Yes, it's limited. Yes, it says its limits, but have you reached those limits yet? I don't think so. Well, I'm talking to myself. Like, hopefully, you have all transcended those limits and you're flying in the skies. Uh, Faiza Kashani combines mysticism and philosophy. Read his poetry. We have some episodes, but read his poetry. Like, thanks to AI, there is no language barrier anymore. You can read basically everything. Um, Are you podcasting right now from a rooftop restaurant? No, I'm not in a rooftop. I'm in a balcony, and that's actually a mountain there. Um, for those who are in our group, our Ibn Arabi or Rumi group, I will send you a picture. I cannot do that now. Don't you think that mystical experience of Ibn Arabi and Rumi is different? That is exactly what I said. Uh, their projects are different. Their focus is different. Like I said, Ibn Arabi wants to teach you the technicality of what is behind the curtain. Rumi doesn't care about that. Rumi says, okay, give me your hand, let's go behind the curtain. I'm not prioritizing Rumi over Ibn Arabi. I'm just seeing a difference in their approach, and I'm just articulating it. I love both. I practice both. I study both and practice what they say, but that's what I understand. Combine them, combine both of them to get the most benefit. Um, I suppose there is no other question, and I have already answered your questions. If there is, please type. If not, let it be. Uh, let these be the last remarks. We have an we have several groups. One for announcements of the Rumi's echoes in general. One for Rumi course where we meet weekly and examine with with the participants in a video call Rumi's poetry and discuss its different aspects: philosophical, mystical, symbolic, literary. And we have a Rumi course. We have an Ibn Arabi course. All the links are in the channel. If you're interested, join us. We would be happy to be hosting you. There seems to be no other question. Thank you very much for joining. I hope this was a worthwhile 35 minutes. Goodbye. You're welcome. You're welcome. Goodbye.